Welcome back to another episode of Taking Inventory. This week, we're welcomed by Alex Kantrowitz, the journalist behind Big Technology Newsletter, the host of the Big Technology Podcast, somebody who's been a respected and award-winning journalist for a number of years. His podcast is a top 10 in tech. He's a regular contributor on CNBC, and he's interviewed people like Kara Swisher, Marissa Mayer, the CEO of Perplexity, and the head of Meta's AI division. So talking to pretty much everyone in the space, he knows what's going on. Alex, super excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, man, we appreciate it. So, I think one thing that we wanted to kind of pick your brain on is, we have a ton of primarily product managers that listen to this podcast that are sort of stepping back and they're at like the big walled gardens and they're like, how should I adapt my products to like this AI landscape? And given that you've interviewed every person in this space, I kind of thought it's almost like we're talking to a GPT that's been trained on how AI leaders think to some extent.
That's right. Soon enough, you won't even have to interview me. You'll just be able to interview my AI clone or something else that approximates what I would be in some other universe. So
yes, well,
we're going to take advantage of this opportunity while we can.
Yeah, I'm thankful we have the real one here. But yeah, I mean, I thought it'd be really kind of, if you could, just for our listeners, could you kind of just give us a state of play of like, what's going on in AI? Like, how should people think about Claude versus OpenAI versus open source? Just like, can you kind of maybe just give us a little bit of a view into the landscape and kind of where things are today?
Yeah, things are moving fast. So as you mentioned, I just published an interview, a half hour ago with Ahmed Aldallah, who's the head of generative AI at Meta, talking about their new Llama 3 model. So we've gone from Llama to Llama 2 to Llama 3, effectively with under a year. And just to give you a sense as to the magnitude here, they took 100 times more compute and 10 times more data to train Llama 3. And we're talking about a matter of months going between Llama 2 and Llama 3. So this field is moving exceptionally fast, and to try to handicap like who's the leader is difficult because you have one company go in production with a model that seems to best the others, and then the other companies are working on their own models, and they're probably ahead of whatever is out there right now. So, of course, you have the major players like Meta, Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, all vying to try to make these large language models as good as they possibly can. And I think that's like effectively step one in this moment that we're having, is get these models to be conversant, hallucinate less, be able to handle lots and lots of data, understand more relationships between things. And that's why you see that these companies are really effectively maxing out the amount of compute and data that they're using to try to build these things. Now we're starting to head a little bit closer towards step two. And step two is going to try to combine these large language models with other machine learning practices to try to make them even smarter and even more capable. And so one way to do that is build reasoning in. So I was just speaking with this guy, the guy from Meta, Ahmed, about this. Effectively, what you do right now with a large language model is you sort of ask it to tell you an answer about something, and it uses its, effectively all of its training data to get you that answer. And what they're going to do is create reasoning within it. So basically allowing it to go step by step. Okay, here's the question. How do I go about breaking down the answer, getting the answer, breaking it down to the component parts, maybe search the internet for it, effectively evaluate whether it was a good answer, and then spit it back to you. So many more steps effectively in the answering of the questions for you, and then eventually the ability to take action. And that's where we get into this new agent paradigm, which seems like we're going to get close to, where these models will not only you give them the input, like a question, and then they will spit something out to you, the answer. Now they might go back to you and ask for a clarification, or they might go out on the internet and take action for you. So that is the state of play.
It's wild. And I heard, you did that interview with Jack Clark, and he was sort of talking about how Claude is like now trying to basically explore, is there creativity in the thinking, and can you actually understand why they're making those choices? Are we now getting, is that like a reality? Are these things going to be not only agents, but creative partners for us? Or is that farther off than we think?
Yeah, so Jack Clark is the co-founder of Anthropic, and he came on for such an interesting conversation on Big Technology Podcast. We talked about, not only where Anthropic is going. Anthropic, by the way, billions of dollars raised across Google and Amazon, so they have the resources to compete here, and also the scientists. They have a good amount of people that have come over from OpenAI to start this splinter company, and they're obviously showing tremendous results. So there's like two questions here. So the first is like, are the models going to be creative themselves? And that's what I was sort of getting at with Jack, basically asking, are they able to generalize outside of their training set? Because we still don't fully know whether these models are just spitting back what we trained them with, or being able to make connections on their own and then sharing those new connections. So actually, one of the most fun parts of the conversation with Jack was when we were talking about how you would determine whether these bots can actually come to new conclusions on their own and not just spit back their training data. So I'm like, well, why don't you just like train the bot on 75% of a field's knowledge and see if it can come to the next 25% on its own? And he said, yes, they're actually trying to evaluate that right now. And one of the ways that they're doing it is within, I think, maybe the field of biology, is they are giving it all the non-classified information and seeing if it can sort of come to the classified stuff on its own. And if it can, then it's really able to generalize, and then you have some serious questions about where this technology is going. So that was fascinating. We don't know the answer yet. I suspect it won't be as exciting when we get those answers. I think that we're still probably limited to the trading set, but my mind is open. Like, I've decided not to, sort of write these things off before we have the answers. But to go to your other question about whether they're going to be creative partners, I mean, yes, definitely already. I'll tell you something. So as I was putting together this interview with Ahmed Abdallah, the Meta head of generative AI, I did what I do now for every interview, which is I take the transcript, I upload it to Claude, the full hour-long transcript, and I say things like, where can I cut? What was most interesting? What comments should I highlight for the promotional post that I'm going to use to sort of promote this episode? And this thing is exceptionally good at it. And it's able to call and it's like saying, hey, you might want to cut this. And it gives me the timestamps, because the timestamps are on the transcript. Cut this out. This was boring, or this could have, you rambled a little bit here. And it's spot on. And so like, we don't need these things to be much more intelligent than they are right now to turn them into creative partners. And I think that if you're in the content business, if you're in marketing or advertising, you're already using this stuff if you're ahead of the curve.
Do you see, though, like with your conversations with someone from Meta versus someone from Anthropic, is there a difference in philosophical point of views, or the companies developing this stuff, and how they want things to progress, given that Google and Meta have existing businesses, Anthropic, OpenAI have approached this as this is their business? Are you seeing a difference in how leaders approach it?
Yeah. So first of all, the startups have less to lose. That's why you saw OpenAI, for instance, put out ChatGPT before everyone else, even though Google had a working version of it called Lambda within the company that even convinced one of its engineers that it was sentient, and Google didn't release it, and ChatGPT was released first. And in fact, in Big Technology, I wrote a story. So I interviewed Blake Lemoine, who believed that the Lambda was sentient, and I wrote a story in Big Technology after that. Sentient or not, this is some extremely powerful technology. And then ChatGPT came out a couple of weeks later, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, it is." So that was an interesting evolution. So I would say yes, these startups have less to lose. They also, and you can hear the difference in the distinction in the conversations between Jack and Ahmed, is that the startups don't have any legacy products to worry about, which means that they can be focused more on the research, more on the model training, and less on how to implement it into products. And so like with Meta, like a big question is like, okay, they developed this Llama 3 model, which came out today, the day that we're talking, a few days in the past by the time this episode publishes. And like a big part of that push is after that model was ready, they worked to integrate it into Messenger and WhatsApp and start to like really give Meta's products the heft of Llama 3. Well, Anthropic doesn't really have to worry about those things. Like, it doesn't have to worry about a pre-existing product that has 1 billion users. Like, it's just not part of like the equation, or billions of users. So it's both blessing and a curse for them because they don't have to worry about the flagship. But on the other hand, the distribution that the people working on Llama 3 have is insane. Like today, starting today, the day that this model comes out, it's going to go to billions of people. So that's kind of the differences in philosophy.
Yeah, it's crazy. As both of us former Snap employees, I read about how they I believe Meta put a cap though on like how big of an app can actually use the models.
Yeah,
Right. So
basically
like
Google can't use it. Everybody else can.
yeah. It's just, but it is to your
Wink,
point.
wink.
It's like a different hand to play.
It's like they're like companies based in Mountain View with 7 billion user products cannot use everything. Everyone else can use it.
Yeah. And I guess given that, like, do you see it going as like maybe an analogy, just like kind of the way the cloud providers have gone, where like maybe Anthropic and OpenAI are the cloud providers, and then you have like Google and Meta and some of these other guys that are building our models kind of stay kind of these walled gardens, or like do you think over time the OpenAIs and the Anthropics become like actually Google competitors and Meta competitors?
Yeah, so my view on this is that all the foundational models will eventually converge. Like the quality is going to commoditize, and you will be able to tell slight differences between GPT or the underlying model, right? Between GPT-4, Llama 3, and Claude, but ultimately it's not going to be a differentiator. So the differentiators in this space are going to be like how the foundational model providers are able to work with companies building on top of them. So that will be crucial. And then their ability to productize on top of the stuff themselves. So like this is why the questions around Google are fascinating, because Google obviously will have a model. Their Gemini model already is on par with GPT-4. But what does that mean? It means nothing unless it knows how to turn it into its product. And Meta's Llama 3, you could say, is is close to on par with these. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, yeah, it's open source. So they're basically giving it away, and maybe they're going to get more people, eager to build with their technology. But ultimately, the thing that's going to matter for them is how well they bake that into their products, and it will help them insulate from, being reliant on, let's say, a Microsoft. And then there's Microsoft, right? You have OpenAI. They're working with OpenAI, and the question for them is going to be, how do you turn this technology into products within Azure that people will build on top of, and within Office that will make them more productive? And then you're, again, competing against Google. So in short, it's all the big questions that we've had about technology, just remixed and spun in a very different way. But yeah, building these models will have some value, but ultimately the end products and the silicon, right, NVIDIA, are going to be where most of the value is generated.
And I guess you did, I think, like a mega episode like a month or two ago on Apple, and like you were kind of diving into like kind of their hand in this. That's the one that I think they just don't get a ton of attention around it. Obviously, they like have the products. I think they have at least they've like for the silicon side, they're doing parts of it themselves, and I heard they're doing some big new plant in California. Like where do we think of them in all of this?
Yeah, so they are fascinating. First of all, like, thank you for listening to the show. Like, already these questions really show that you listen, which is awesome.
Oh yeah, we're like fanboys, man. We love it. It's awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, look, I mean, I put a lot of work into it, so it's good to know that it's getting, it's useful to people in the industry. All right, so yes, Apple's going to have some innovators dilemma questions, right? Because there's like going to be two ways that they have this big announcement coming up in WWDC, their developer conference in June, where they're going to talk about AI, and you're effectively going to see this played out in two ways. And by the way, we have an episode coming out on this next week with MG Siegler, where we really go deep into it.
Oh, cool.
One way is the product itself, where they're going to have a choice to make. They have this very popular operating system in iOS. So how much do you actually want to change that in service of making it an AI phone? And if you don't change it enough, you then open the door to somebody else, let's say a Samsung or an Android even, to be able to make the changes that will sort of overtake you. It's possible. Like if an AI phone is that much better than the phone we have today, how long is Apple going to want to hold on to standard iOS and hope that the future won't come? So, and what's it going to do with, with Siri, right? Those are some interesting questions. How much, the key question for Apple with Siri is really, it's been the AI, but it's also been the control, how much will Apple want to cede the control of Siri, right? Let people build applications into it that aren't Apple. That's been the question, and so far they haven't really shown a willingness or an ability to do that. And then the other thing is going to be the developer side, right? What technology can Apple offer to developers of apps that will enable them to run AI applications on the phone in a way that they can't elsewhere? And if they're able to make a meaningful improvement here, then you start to ask, well, can they, can they then make an operating system where the apps that run AI are that much better than anywhere else because they're running on these custom Apple chips? That then solidifies their lead and doesn't require a huge operating system change. So these are all the things that are in play with Apple. And there were when Apple started talking about AI, people said, "Okay, Apple said the magical two letters AI, and now give them another trillion in market cap." And it's simply not going to work that way. It's a much more complicated question.
That brings up something I've been reading a lot about, because I think it's been in the news, and a YouTuber kind of went viral for his review of the Humane AI pin. But you're talking about Apple and how they need to approach kind of their operating system and start to work with developers. But then there is this open question of there are other new devices that are AI enabled, and they're very simplistic is in quotes, but simplistic from a consumer experience perspective. But they are new devices, and so do you see that there's maybe a new device format that's coming to play, or is this something that will likely converge into the Androids, the iOSs, the existing devices we're used to?
I mean, not anytime soon. I mean, even before this Humane pin came out,
Mm-hmm.
you had the Meta Ray-Bans that have an AI assistant baked in and is effectively doing a lot of the same stuff and is better. But is that taken off? Like, are we all walking out
Yeah.
with Meta Ray-Bans? I don't think so. So, I mean, maybe you guys have some interesting input on this because you were at a company that was like sort of first to the, smart wearable.
Yeah, I think it's funny that we had on the podcast the head of marketing from Meta Reality Labs. She was former Shahar Scott. She formerly was at Snap as well, and she was really honest about it. It was like Meta Ray-Bans is basically a better implementation of Snap spectacles, like
Yeah.
at the end of the day. And she basically was like, listen, like Meta just executed better, and that's why people like it more, and it will get better over time.
Yeah.
But Snap was sort of it's kind of a classic Snap, like right idea, maybe too early, maybe execution wasn't sort of perfect. And in some ways, it kind of, I've thought about it, and I don't know enough about it. I'd love to get your point of view on this. But like, I've thought about it kind of similar to OpenAI, where it's like, OpenAI kind of reminds me of Snap in a weird way, where it's like they nailed the first
Right.
implementation of it, but then you sort of look at their hand and you're like, I don't know, like, is this going to end up being a glorified Microsoft app? Like at the end of the day, like what is this thing compared to its competitors? Is that a fair distinction or a fair way to think about OpenAI, like given the space?
Yeah, I think that is. I mean, I've always said that OpenAI is in the hits business, right? So is Snap.
Yep.
And the thing is, you can make a great innovation like spectacles or stories, but then everybody's going to try to do it themselves. We've seen that happen with GPT-4, and that's why it's no surprise that you've seen OpenAI push on a GPT store where you can build your own little bots, and that seems to have kind of had mixed or poor results, and that's why you see them pushing into new models like was it Sora, the video model, right? So they're just going to have to keep pushing the status quo forward. And by the way, now it's not just the big ones, but there are so many companies that are trying to build new different applications, and sometimes it's on top of OpenAI. By the way, like you talked about Perplexity in the intro, right? So Perplexity is effectively built on top of OpenAI, but it's a search engine. So who's going to get the value there? It's generally the application, not necessarily the foundational model provider. So they have to keep pumping out hits, and that's why, by the way, I think Sam Altman sees this, and that's why he has a startup fund. That's why he's out trying to raise $7 trillion for a chip company. That's why he's trying to build a device with Johnny Ive. Right? Do you think any of this is an accident? I don't think so.
Yeah. I guess given just on the OpenAI side, I guess the the foil to all that is seems like it's Elon Musk, right? Where Elon's basically like called OpenAI on BS. What's your take kind of on I guess maybe like full self driving? No one really seems to be talking about Grok. Like how's the Tesla sort of X hand kind of laying out, based on what you're hearing so far?
Not well. So first of all, I think Elon is making a terrible mistake not making Grok available at least to all verified subscribers on X, right? So I like pay for the subscription. Not ashamed to admit it. I think it's useful for me, especially when it comes to reporting. I get into the DMs and there's like you get sort of added priority there. It's worth it, just for that. Although I feel like I could take it away now and they're now giving it back. So there's a chance it will come back. Anyway, that's a side point. The bottom line is that they should be making this available because with more user interaction, they can train better and make that model better. But they're not. And I think there's two reasons why they're not. One is it's super expensive to run these things. And I think they're a little bit nervous about spending that money, which is interesting because you have to spend money to win this war. And two is I don't think their personality is quite dialed in yet. I mean, Grok right now, just from all the screenshots that I've seen, is incredibly cringe. And it's not, just think about how embarrassing it would be if they released that out to the world as this antidote to like woke ChatGPT, and it just sucks and it's cringe. So they need to do a better job there. There's no doubt about that. Full self-driving, look, it's a real question of whether Tesla will be able to create these autonomous vehicles with just the data that they have. And, they try to run autonomous with much less technology than, let's say, a Cruise or a Waymo. And it's it's no surprise now that they're behind Cruise and Waymo. So they could get there. If they get there, it's a game changer for Tesla. And like Musk just announced there's going to be this robo-taxi event in August. So they must feel like they're getting close. And it's possible they do it. But from all accounts, it seems like it's still a little bit further away than they would like it to be. But the rockets are cool, and Neuralink is cool.
The rockets are very cool.
It's a wash, Elon. It's a wash.
On the self-driving side, just again giving you cover so many of these big tech companies. We have friends at like Uber, for example, and like we've been sort of kind of just trying to understand like what's going to happen with Waymo just rolled out. We're in LA. Waymo's in Santa Monica now. From all accounts, it's awesome.
Have you guys been in the Waymos yet?
No. It doesn't come to. Yeah. How is it?
Get out to Santa Monica and give it a shot. It is incredible.
So like, what's going to happen? Like, what happens to Uber and all this? Are they become distribution for them? Like, how does it all play?
Yeah, they could be. I mean, Uber has a partnership with Waymo, so I know that the technology providers like Waymo's and Cruise are going to be open to inking partnerships with these other companies. And by the way, there'll still be moments for Uber to jump in. So if you think about it, the nice thing about Uber, it has like this really variable fleet of cars that it can call online if there's a real busy time with surge pricing, and can have sit at home when it's not busy. And with these robo-taxis, they're kind of online all the time. So they will not fully replace human drivers because you're just not going to build, enough taxis to meet peak demand, because that would be silly because they'd be sitting around all the time otherwise. So I think there will always be this at least in the near to mid future, this balance between human drivers and robot drivers. That being said, them coming to Santa Monica is really showing that they can generalize this technology, right? It's not that they just have to build custom for each city that they're working in, because like now they're in Phoenix. They're in a large part of San Francisco now, and they're coming to Santa Monica. So they're expanding. The cars are incredible, better than any human driver you'll ever sit with, by the way, because they think about just like the decision to brake, right? We like kind of know when to brake, and we kind of hit the brake, and you're a decent driver, you know to slow down, like, as you ease into a stop, but sometimes you sort of, see something at the last second and slam on the pedal. Waymo never does that. If Waymo is like, it will just ease you into your stop. And I can say that, I was in San Francisco with my wife for 3 weeks in July last year, and we got like this 1 week pass to Waymo. And we took it everywhere. And we would be on our phones in an Uber and a Lyft with human drivers and like be ready to puke by the time we got out of those cars with all those hills and stop signs. But with the Waymo, you could like effectively like be on your phone, your laptop, and the ride is so smooth that you'll never feel that way. And it's also kind of fun that there's like no driver there, not only because like you skip a lot of the awkward small talk, and the car will always smell good, but you can also just like turn the music up, have a dance party, just like do whatever you want, and it's your space. And now there are people that are watching you on camera, which is a little weird. Like you will see that if you don't put your seatbelt on, like someone's going to call in and be like, "Hey, put your seatbelt on."
Oh,
Put it
no
on.
way.
They're like, "Thank you." And I'm like, "Wait, are you watching me right now?" They're like, "Yes, we are." I'm like, "How many fingers am I holding up?" They're like, "4 fingers." I'm like, "Oh shit, those cameras are high quality." But this really is the future. I'm very excited about it. I think that Cruise has had some problems, but Waymo continues to push on in a much more cautious and I don't know, technologically sophisticated way. And I think our public has been trained to ignore this stuff because there's been a lot of promise and not much delivery. But it's real. It's coming fast, and it's very exciting to me.
It's interesting because it's kind of one of the first times that I've like heard someone articulate that like it's a really good example of like human beings are going to be the AI's assistant in that scenario. Like what you just described as like humans being the overflow to the robots
Yeah.
is, it may not be a great future, I guess, but that is I guess you could start seeing that in a bunch of different industries over time where like surge capacity is filled by humans versus vice versa.
Right. And the humans want to take those surge rides, by the way. Like a Uber driver doesn't make a ton of money sitting around waiting for a ride in a slow time. They want to be working in the busy times. So, I mean, ultimately, they'd probably rather not have any robots on the road.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's sort of cliche at this point, but
Yeah.
the horse and buggy drivers didn't want any cars. So
It doesn't seem like an option at this point. You've done a lot of like recent writing specifically about Google and kind of the changing culture and what that's doing to kind of their product development and what it's just doing to the ethos of Google. But I think we've touched so much today on just the speed of everything, right? Big companies, startups, and sure, including Google, but Meta and Uber, a lot of these other organizations that are going through kind of fundamental shifts in their business. What is happening to the culture at all these companies and tech in general? Like, what has that evolution been, and what do you think it means as we move forward?
yeah, a few big things. It's a great question. So first of all, these cultures are definitely like the big tech cultures sort of became summer camp ahead of the pandemic. And you understand why. It was zero interest rate times and they were printing money and there was no pressure. And so they became kind of bloated. They became kind of this place where employees relaxed and made these day in the life videos where it's like, so just working at Facebook mean like getting 9 smoothies in the day and lunch in the middle. Uh, and they've really, the higher interest rates and this more less forgiving economic climate has really clamped down on that, right? There's been a tremendous amount of layoffs. Um, the companies have cut down on perks. They don't feel like summer camps anymore, and they've been able to ship faster. So it's, it would be great if you could be an employee and sort of like hang out in the dining room all day and, get a 6-figure paycheck. But, ultimately that was unsustainable, and we've seen the end of that. But for some employees, that'll be better, right? Just to be in a culture that is more dedicated to shipping and moves faster, works with urgency, and your colleagues are motivated to crush it. Like there are people that will be more interested in that than just being in a senior citizen center for millennials. Now, the other thing is that there's plus and minuses to this next thing that I'm going to talk about, which is there have been open cultures almost to a fault within these tech companies. So at Meta, they encourage you to bring your full self to work and talk about politics and your issues. And now they prohibit any political discussion on these internal corporate systems, messaging systems. So they've become less open. And a lot of things are much more restricted now after lots of leaking. And that's across the tech giants, right? And we even saw an example this week where Google fired 28 employees for protesting with, in the company's offices. And it's like, that's a huge thing. They never do that. But they're sick of it. And, I think their message they're sending to their employee base is if you want to be activists, work through the mainstream political system, or like go to the ballot box, organize, for candidates you want and for causes you want, but just sitting in like an executive office isn't going to get you anywhere, and it's going to disrupt the business. And so that's sort of another thing that they've done. And that's, I think there's something to that, right? Like I always found it a little weird that like people advocating for their company to post a message on Instagram was like the be all end all of there's political advocacy. Like there's an actual political system that you can get involved in and influence, and might even do you more than these posts. So that's another thing. But yeah, it's going to clamp down a little bit on their ability to collaborate across groups, and may encourage people to the layoffs may encourage great performers to leave and do their own thing. So there's downsides here, but it's definitely a shift from where it was pre-COVID.
And you mentioned just before we wrap, but you mentioned sort of like the political climate, and obviously it's an election year, and you've covered this on your podcast. But love to just get maybe just your kind of what's your take on what's going to happen to TikTok? We have a bunch of friends that used to work there. We have friends that work there. We kind of have our own point of view on I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, to be honest. But what's your bet? What happens to this thing?
So, trying to decide. Okay, I'll tell this story. So, before I went into sales and marketing, where I started my career, which preceded my move into journalism, I did a tiny bit of work in politics, tiny bit, but it was eventful. It included running an assembly campaign in Queens, and a state assembly campaign in Queens, and also, embarrassingly, I was also an intern for Anthony Weiner's congressional office.
Okay.
And it was like right around the time where he was picking up Twitter, and the joke that I always make, which is not true, but I tell people that I taught him how to use Twitter, and he paid a lot of attention for the tweet and the notification, but did not pay attention to direct messages, and that's where he went wrong. But anyway, one of the cool things I got to do there was I went down to DC for a week just to see what it was like in the congressional office. I was working in the district office in Queens, and we saw. Mitch McConnell was speaking to the congressional interns that week, and he talked a little bit. He goes, "I'm going to tell you about process, and I know you're going to think it's boring, but I'm going to talk about it." And he talked about how basically like the way that government works is the Congress is like a steaming hot cup of tea where lots of stuff spills out, and the Senate is like the saucer where it cools down. You sort of like get your level head on it, and I think that's really appropriate to think about this TikTok thing, where this TikTok ban screamed out of Congress, and what's happened? It's in the Senate, and it's in that saucer, and it's really cooling off. And I think the fact that we haven't seen the Senate quickly move ahead with this decision to ban TikTok means again that we're not even ban it, but force a sale or face a ban, means again that we're going to probably see the status quo continue, and TikTok's not going to go anywhere in the US. I could be wrong, but that's my take on it. What do you guys think?
I think it should get banned. I think it should be forced to be sold, to be honest. I think just seeing, again, just from not allowing these other services into that market. And then we do have friends that used to work there that have told us stories where it's like, it is a Chinese run company. Like they're involved in everything. And they, it's not like the company is ByteDance. It's not TikTok, and, they, anecdotally had friends who said like they wouldn't use TikTok,
really
who worked there. Yeah. So,
oh my God, introduce me to these friends. I'd love to
they're scared. They're like scared to talk to people, which just makes me think that there probably is, when there's smoke, there's fire. There. But I don't think it should be banned. I think a forced sale, seems like an appropriate, outcome. And, I've tweeted about this. Like if Walmart could get its hands on it, like I'm moving to Bentonville. Like if you could have TikTok, Walmart, and Vizio all be owned by one thing, it would be incredible. Right,
but we'll see if they actually do sell it, right? Even if they're forced to, they might just decide to shut it down. And if they do sell it, do they also sell the algorithm? Because if they don't sell the algorithm, then what do you have?
And that's part of the thing is like the algorithm, like I think what people do forget is because it's allowed in a market that, Meta's not allowed. There's just a lot more training data that they get access to. Like, so that
Definitely.
is, so I think but I agree. I mean, it seems like at this point, like when Trump switched gears on it, it's like, there's like no one in favor of pushing this forward. So it seems like it won't really happen.
Yep, most likely.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
And I mean, that brings up the interesting kind of ideas. We talk so much about AI, but like, how do you decouple the body and the brain? Like you can't, right? Like if you
Yeah.
pull the product, like what good is that without the other, and vice versa? So it is a really interesting debate, I guess. But Alex, as we kind of wrap up, one thing we didn't touch on is the book you wrote a few years ago, Always Day One: How the Tech Titans Plan to Stay on Top Forever. I think anyone listening should go check it out. But I think as a last question, like given the changes in the last 4 years since you wrote that book, like what if you're writing a second book, or if you're thinking about writing a second book, or what would you look at now, and like what has changed since you first wrote that? And like, do you think it still
Yeah. I
stands?
mean,
Yeah.
the title, I think the book holds up great, and
Yeah.
the title would be Still Day One. And if anything, the book was looking at, day one. What does day one mean? So like initially I watched a clip of Jeff Bezos like addressing Amazon employees, and he's like, he's like, basically someone's like, what does day two look like? And he's like, day two is like stasis, followed by long, painful decline, followed by irrelevance, followed by death. And that's why it's always day one. And I was like, oh, Jeff Bezos is just telling these Amazon employees that they have to work nights and weekends and Thanksgiving, which was mostly true. But it's not what day one means. Like the best thing about being a startup on your first day is you don't have to care at all about a legacy product. And we've talked about this actually with Anthropic and OpenAI. You just build what the market needs. And you don't worry about sustaining what it got you there to that point because it doesn't matter. That's your advantage as a startup. And what Bezos is telling Amazon employees in this day one speech is basically like, who cares what got us here today? We're only as good as what we can provide to the market, and not regard our legacy products as the most important thing. It's about the day one thinking that's going to get us to the next stage. And that's how you saw Amazon go from like a bookseller to something that sold everything in a first party marketplace, and then a third party marketplace, transforming to hardware with the Kindle and voice computing with Alexa. And then finally it becomes a web services company. And then who knows what's going to happen? And the reason why they have to adjust is because computing adjusts so often. Like the nature of the world right now is that we're moving faster. Like we talked earlier about how quickly we went from Llama 2 to Llama 3, adding in 10 times more data and 100 times more compute. That's the world we live in. And that's why last century a company would spend 67 years on the S&P 500. One idea for a lifetime on the S&P 500, and now it's 15 years. So to basically make the equivalent, you need 3.5 ideas. And so that's why I'm saying still day one, because if anything, AI has brought us to the point where these companies need to transform even faster. And this idea of let go of your legacy and think about what's coming next and build that. And, Wall Street be damned, because you can, churn out profits for a decade like Microsoft did under Steve Ballmer. It's going to leave you nowhere if you're not prepared for the next shift. And that's where they eventually needed to bring in Satya Nadella, who brought in this day one mindset and said, actually, we're going to do cloud now. And look at where they are right now. They're the most valuable company in the world. So that's basically my take. Still day one would be the pitch. But I'm not going to write the next book. I feel like I'll keep writing what would be the next book in big technology and talking about these ideas in big technology podcast, and that works well for me.
And so then where can listeners follow you with the podcast, with your writing, and anything else?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to shout it out. So the podcast is called Big Technology Podcast. It's on your podcast app of choice, and the newsletter, you can find it on bigtechnology.com.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for doing this. The podcast is awesome. Everyone should listen to it.
Thank you.
And thank you for, making the time to do this. And I know you got a ton going on, and everyone should also tune in whenever Alex is on CNBC. He's all over the place doing some awesome stuff. So thanks again, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate being here with you guys.